Congratulations on the purchase of your new Serger Overlock machine. By using the Overlock machine along with your conventional sewing machine, your garments, home decorating projects, and crafts will be faster and easier to create. Projects will have a professional look that can only come from an Overlock machine because it sews, over edges, and trims all in one operation. In this program, we will show the basics you need to use your machine, such as how to thread the machine for different types of stitches and simple machine maintenance. Then we'll show some of the optional presser feet which are available to enhance your machine's versatility and your own creativity. So let's get started. Serger sewing is often seen in purchased garments, mainly in seam construction and seam finishes. It's also found in home decor and craft projects. Your serger uses up to 4 different threads to create a stitch. There are 2 needles and 2 loopers, which work together in different combinations to form stitches. There is a lower blade and an upper knife, which work together to trim the fabric edges when you sew. The lower blade's position can be moved left or right to control how much fabric is allowed into the stitch. The blade is preset in the rolled hem position when you first take the machine out of the box. The blade can be moved toward the right for regular sewing position. This is the knife adjustment for the lower blade. To adjust the blade's position, turn the knob located at the front of the machine. For more details on this, refer to your machine manual. Notice the 2 small screws which hold the needles in place, one for the right needle marked A and one for the left needle marked B. Notice also that the left needle sits just a bit higher than the right needle. Your machine comes with 2 needles already in place. Because the machine can do different types of stitches, it may be necessary to change the needle setup of the machine. We'll talk more about this later in the program. To remove a needle, insert the end of the screwdriver from your accessory kit into the screw. Turn counterclockwise and the needle is released. Do the same procedure to remove the right needle. To replace a needle, slip the needle into the needle slot. Make sure that the flat side of the needle shank is toward the back. Push the needle all the way up, then tighten the screw. Oil the machine here and here, and use only sewing machine oil. After cleaning out any lint, just a drop is needed on these moving parts about every 10 hours of actual stitching time. Cleaning brushes and sewing machine oil are available from your Serger retailer. The stitch length control is located on the right side of the machine. This adjusts the stitches so that they sew closer together or further apart. The higher the number setting on the dial, the more distance between the stitches. And the lower the number, the more dense the stitching becomes. The setting marked F means fine. It's a very short stitch length, mostly used for rolled hemming, which will be shown later in the program. Differential feed prevents seams from puckering or becoming stretched, and can also be used to gather fabrics. Look under the presser foot and you will see the feed dogs, which pull fabric under the presser foot when you sew. By setting the lever toward the top, the front feed dog moves more slowly than the back, causing the fabric to stretch. This helps pull the fabric taut, removing any puckers. By setting the lever toward the bottom, the front feed dog moves faster than the back, causing the fabric to gather. This can also be very helpful in preventing seams from becoming stretched out, especially on sweatshirt fabrics or fleece. Let's begin with the 4-thread stitch. This stitch is most often used for seams in stretch garments like t-shirts and sweatshirts, and for applying ribbing and elastic. It can also be used as a seam on light to medium weight woven fabrics. The 4-thread stitch consists of 2 looper threads and 2 needle threads. The loopers are threaded first, and the needles are always threaded last. It is important that the machine is correctly threaded, or it will not stitch. Raise the presser foot. To thread the loopers, turn the hand wheel so that the loopers are positioned like this. The upper looper should always be threaded first. Place the thread spool on the thread stand, then bring the thread up and through the guide on the thread mast. Place it into the guide on top of the machine. Hold the thread and then firmly place it into the tension disc. After placing the thread behind this guide, follow the thread path indicated by the red dotted markings. Then thread the eye of the upper looper. If it's easier, use the tweezers from your accessory kit to thread the looper's eye. Next, thread the lower looper. Place the thread spool on the thread stand, then bring the thread up and through the guide on the thread mast. Now place it into the guide on top of the machine. Pull the thread firmly into the tension disc. After placing the thread behind this guide, follow the thread path indicated by the gold dotted markings. The thread is guided next into a slot at the left side of the looper's arm. But to do this, you must first bring the thread around to the back side of the looper. Hold the thread firmly toward you and then slide it to the left until it drops into the slot on the looper arm. Now thread the eye of the lower looper, making sure that the thread tail lays over the upper looper. This is very important because if the lower looper thread is not placed over the upper looper, the threads will tangle and the machine will not stitch. The needles are always threaded last, after the loopers are threaded. Place each thread in its corresponding thread guide on the thread mast. The right needle thread is threaded through the green tension disc, behind the guides below the disc, then over the green dot on the take-up lever, and then behind the thread guide above the needle. Now thread the right needle. The left needle thread is threaded through the blue tension disc. behind the guides below the disc, then over the take-up lever area. Place it in the slot between the blue dot and the green dot. Place the thread behind the guide above the needle. Now thread the left needle. Set the lower blade in regular sewing position. Bring both needle threads, as well as both looper threads, under the presser foot and toward the back of the machine. A balanced 3-thread stitch should look like this. Let's take a look at some ways to adjust the stitch in case it doesn't appear to be properly balanced. The upper looper thread appears here on the balanced stitch. If the upper looper is too loose, the stitch will look like this. To adjust, turn the red tension dial to a higher number and test on a piece of scrap fabric. If the upper looper is too tight, the stitch will look like this. In which case, you should turn the red tension dial to a lower number. Then test on a piece of scrap fabric. Continue this process until the stitches meet at the fabric's edge. On a balanced stitch, the lower looper thread is here. If the lower looper is too loose, the stitch will look like this. To adjust, turn the gold tension dial to a higher number and test on a piece of scrap fabric. If the lower looper thread is too tight, the stitch will look like this, and the fabric may even tend to pull to the underside. In this case, turn the gold tension dial to a lower number. Then test on a piece of scrap fabric. Continue this process until the stitches meet at the fabric's edge. If the needle thread appears loose, tighten the needle tension dial. If the fabric seam appears to be puckering, loosen the needle tension dial. The rolled hem is used to create fine edge finishing on projects like scarves, table linens, ribbons, and ruffles. Best results will come from sewing with lightweight to medium weight fabrics such as silk, shears, and cotton. Since this stitch is simply a variation of the 3-thread stitch, set the machine first for a regular 3-thread stitch with the needle in right position. Be sure to remove the left needle. Move the stitch width finger by sliding the stitch finger knob located at the front of the machine toward you. This causes the stitch width finger to become narrower, therefore producing a narrower stitch. Set the lower blade to the rolled hem position. Set the stitch length dial to a shorter setting. The setting marked F will give a dense edge, but the type of fabric being used, as well as the desired look, will determine where to set the stitch length dial. Sew, and a narrow hem is formed. To cause the fabric to actually roll to the bottom side of the fabric and make a rolled hem, turn the lower looper tension to a tighter setting. This pulls the lower looper thread tighter, which brings the fabric edge around to the bottom side of the fabric, creating the rolled hem. There are optional accessories available which will make sewing with your serger even faster and easier. We'll show you some of the most popular feet. Check with your Singer retailer for information about more accessories available. To change the presser foot, raise the presser foot lifter. Press the button at the back of the foot's shank and the foot will release. To replace a presser foot, place the foot under the shank, line up the foot under the shank, and then lower the presser foot lifter. The foot will just snap onto the shank, ready to sew. Creating blind hems with the serger is great for sewing long hems, such as in home deck projects. Remove the left needle and set the stitch length for 3 or 4. Fold the fabric in this manner and then place the fabric under the foot like this. The screw on top of the foot adjusts the guide so that you can line up the fold of the fabric with the needle. While sewing, the needle should just catch the hem's fold. Practice on a piece of scrap fabric to determine where to set the guide. Swimwear, activewear, and lingerie are easier to make using the elastic foot. Because the foot stretches the elastic, you don't have to worry about pulling it too much or not enough, which could create an inconsistent, uneven look. Instead, you'll have professional-looking results. Place the elastic under the break in front of the foot and run it through to the back. The fabric goes under the foot. The adjustment screw on top of the foot controls the amount of stretch applied to the elastic. Tighter for more stretch, looser for less. Use either the 3-thread or the 4-thread stitch. Set the stitch length to 4. Practice on a piece of scrap fabric to determine the desired amount of stretch for your project. The shearing foot is used in conjunction with the differential feed. Though differential feed will make gathers, what this foot will allow you to do is simultaneously apply a ruffle or gathered edge to a flat fabric, like on kitchen curtains or girls' dresses. Set up the machine for either 3-thread or 4-thread sewing. Place the fabric to be gathered under the foot, and then place the fabric that will remain flat into the foot's opening until the fabric edges are flush. Set differential feed for the amount of gathering desired. It's a good idea to practice on a piece of scrap fabric first to make sure the gather setting is where you want it, and also to help determine how much ruffle fabric will be needed. For fuller gathers, lengthen your stitch length setting. Particularly useful for long seams with piping, the cording foot allows you to insert the cording while you serge the seams. It's a great time saver. Raise the presser foot and set the needle in highest position. Place the bottom fabric, the cording tape, and the top fabric right sides together under the foot. Make sure that the cording is lined up in the groove on the underside of the foot. Lower the presser foot and sew. The yarn application foot will help you apply wire, fish line, or thin cord into a rolled hem. Use it to create body in hems on chiffon or sheers. It can even be used to create wire-edged ribbon. Set the machine for a rolled hem. Thread the cord through the front slot and under the finger of the foot. Place the fabric right side up under the foot and then sew. The 2-thread stitch is used mainly for seam finishes. Because the stitch is only 2 threads, it offers a soft seam finish that leaves no thread impressions after ironing. It could also be used for a rolled hem. This stitch uses 1 needle thread and the lower looper thread. The upper looper is unthreaded, and in addition, it is altered by installing the spreader attachment onto the looper. The spreader is in your accessory kit, which comes with the machine. Now you're ready to begin threading. First, thread the lower looper. Place the thread spool on the thread stand, then bring the thread up and through the guide on the thread mast. Now place it into the guide on top of the machine. Pull the thread firmly into the gold tension disc. After placing the thread behind this guide, follow the thread path indicated by the gold dotted markings. The thread is guided next into a slot at the left side of the looper's arm. But to do this, you must first bring the thread around to the back side of the looper. Hold the thread firmly toward you and then slide it to the left until it drops into the slot on the looper arm. Now thread the eye of the lower looper, making sure that the thread tail lays over the upper looper. Next is the needle thread. For a wider 2-thread stitch, use the left needle and remove the right needle. For a narrower 2-thread stitch, use the right needle and remove the left needle. For this demonstration, let's thread the machine for the narrower 2-thread stitch using the right needle. Place the spool in the thread guide on the thread mast. The right needle thread is threaded through the green tension disc behind this guide below the tension disc, then over to the green dot marking of the take-up lever area. Bring the thread down behind the guide above the needle and then thread the needle. Set the lower blade in regular sewing position and place all threads underneath the presser foot. Lower the presser foot, then sew. A balanced 2-thread stitch should look like this. It is a bit different from the other stitches because the lower looper thread appears on top and the needle thread forms V-shaped stitches on the bottom side. If the lower looper is too tight, the stitch will look like this, and the fabric will tend to curl. Loosen the lower looper tension. If the lower looper thread is too loose, the stitch will look like this, looping around the back side. Tighten the lower looper tension until the stitches once again meet at the fabric's edge. If the needle thread is too tight, the looper thread will pull to the back side and the fabric will curl. Loosen the needle thread tension. If the needle thread is too loose, the bottom thread will spill over to the top side of the fabric and the stitches will look uneven. Tighten the needle thread tension until the threads meet at the fabric edge.